Acquitted, the men accused of murdering 15-year-old Scarlett Keeling in Goa in 2008. Scarlett was on a family trip of a lifetime to India when she was killed on a beach. Local police had tried to dismiss it as an accident.
My hopes are dashed, really. She wasn't worth anything to them. Our tourists don't seem to be worth anything to the judicial system. They don't care about us.
Also this lunchtime, life for double murderer Christopher Halliwell. The judge calls him calculating and cynical, tells him he'll die in prison. Assad's fresh onslaught on the Syrian rebel stronghold of Aleppo. A rescue worker says it's annihilation. And the customers scammed out of cash and being let down by their banks.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Alistair Stewart.
Good afternoon. Scarlett Keeling's grieving mother believes her daughter was the victim of a brutal attack by two men and a victim of a corrupt legal system in India. Her 15-year-old daughter was found dead on a beach on the holiday island of Goa. Initially, police concluded it was an accident after a party. Pressure for a full investigation eventually discovered the teenager had been drugged and assaulted. But today, a court acquitted the two suspects of all charges. Scarlett's mother, Fiona McCann, says she feels absolutely devastated. Paul Davis has been speaking to her.
15-year-old Scarlett Keeling was drugged, raped and left to drown. Today, her mother, Fiona, had to be helped from the New Delhi court after hearing that this man had been cleared of all charges, along with the second accused who is standing behind his lawyer here. Scarlett's mother had travelled from her home in Devon, hoping her 8-year-old battle for justice might be over. The verdict left her temporarily stunned.
I'll speak later. Yeah, I'm still shocked, really.
A short time later, speaking over the internet, she gave me her reaction to the female judge's decision.
I'm just reeling at the moment, to be quite honest. I still can't get my head around how she could let them off on everything when there were so many witnesses saw them putting drugs out for her.
Scarlett had been staying with friends at Goa's popular Anjuna beach. She attended a party here on the night she was drugged and assaulted. Fiona McEwen refused to accept the local police's early conclusion that her daughter's death was an accident. Closer investigation showed Scarlett had been drugged and raped. But 8 years on, her mother despairs of ever finding justice now.
I've heard the chief ministers and the ministers promise they're going to support us and they're going to treat it like it was their own daughter, and then they shut the door on their faces the next day. So I just don't know who I can believe and who I can trust as far as the system here is concerned.
The court has yet to explain its decision. Scarlett's family must now decide whether to take their fight for justice any further.
And bluntly, is there any point in doing that?
Well, the decision now rests with India's Central Bureau of Investigation, their version of the CPS. They'll decide whether or not they're going to appeal or not. This is likely to take some time. We haven't even heard the reasons for the judge's decision. They'll be studying those before they reach any conclusion. Fiona McCowan told me she was very upset, as you saw, but she did tell me that she's not sure now whether she's got the strength or, in fact, the money to pursue her campaign. The embassy say they've been supporting her. They'll continue to support her, but she has a big decision to make now.
Indeed. Paul, thank you. Here, a judge has told a double murderer he will die in prison, sentencing Christopher Halliwell to a whole life sentence for murdering Becky Godden. He said Halliwell was calculating and devious. Halliwell raped and murdered 20-year-old Becky in 2003. He smirked at her family as he was led away in court. Rupert Evelyn was in court at that time. So a long sentence for a calculating killer.
Yeah, life really does mean life for Christopher Halliwell, and in order for that to happen, the judge had to be satisfied that in the two murders that he has convicted, there was both a sexual conduct and abduction form part of those crimes. The judge says he was satisfied that that was the case and gave Halliwell a whole life term for the murder of Becky Godden, the verdict of which we had on Monday. The judge said in sentencing today, "I have no doubt that you, Halliwell, are a self-centred and domineering individual who wants his own way. You're both calculating, devious and controlling," and he sought to manipulate the police and the court process.
What have Becky's family had to say at the end of all of this?
Well, we heard in court two very moving victim impact statements that were read out. Karen Edwards, Becky's mum, said it was news when she heard of Becky's death that no parent should ever hear. She said her world had fallen apart and she had that feeling of total devastation, disbelief, loss, pain and the flash of sudden panic. Outside court afterwards, we heard from Becky Godden's father, John, who shared with us, I think, some of his frustration at the amount of time it took police to reach a conviction in this crime.
It's going to take a long time for it to sink in. I just, at the moment, you know, I've been numb for 5 or 6 years. Anger, you know, I'm actually mentally scarred by the Wiltshire police and their handling of this case, and no one's been made accountable for their actions.
And any more on these police suspicions that Halliwell may have been involved in other crimes?
Well, the police have always suspected that. There was a gap of 8 years between the murder of Sian O'Callaghan and Becky Godden. And the police said today that both during the trial and since the verdict on Monday, they have received a number of lines inquiry relating to quite serious crimes, which they will now pursue. Halliwell, on the other hand, will stay in prison for the rest of his life.
Rupert, thank you. The Syrian city of Aleppo is suffering one of its heaviest bombardments after the Syrian army confirmed a new major offensive on the city. As diplomats talked of their long, painful and disappointing efforts to negotiate a lasting peace, parts of the city were reduced to rubble. Aid workers who've seen 3 of their 4 bases destroyed say the renewed attacks amount to an attempt at annihilation. Neil Connery has the latest.
This is the carnage left behind by a fresh wave of airstrikes in Aleppo, hours after the Syrian government announced an offensive to retake rebel-held areas. Activists say Syrian and Russian planes have been pounding the east of the city. Aid groups have described what's happening as simply annihilation.
What we're hearing from East Aleppo today is that they're experiencing some of the worst violence that they've seen so far. Our partners, aid workers, are trapped in a basement, unable to even get out to help people because it's so intense. And that comes as the peace talks failed once again.
In New York, those diplomatic efforts to try and salvage a return to a ceasefire continue. But meetings between Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, the US Secretary of State John Kerry and other diplomats offer little hope.
It was a long, painful, difficult and disappointing meeting. The bad news is that the Syrian people are still waiting for having the cessation of hostilities. The good news, if you want to hear them, is that both Russia and America agreed to continue intensely to work on a possible restoration of it.
The urgency of the situation was made clear by America's top diplomat.
This is not a time for maneuvering or for delay. It is time to make decisions that will benefit the people of Syria and hopefully bring stability to a country and to a region that is in absolutely desperate need.
Footage released by the Syrian military on Friday showed fighting in the northern Latakia countryside between the Syrian army and rebel groups. A week which had started with a glimmer of hope ends with the depressing return to business as usual as Syria's suffering grinds on. Neil Connery, ITV News.
Here, the President of the European Parliament has told ITV News that he hopes to hear more from the Prime Minister about Britain's timetable to leave the EU at the Conservative Party conference next weekend. Martin Schulz in London to meet Theresa May said the Prime Minister should not lose too much time in triggering Article 50, which would then allow Britain to leave. Well, her comments come after Boris Johnson said yesterday that the UK will begin Brexit talks early next year. Our political correspondent Libby Vina joins us live now from Westminster. So, developments every which way. What have you learnt this lunchtime, Libby?
Well, Alistair, you might think that Martin Schulz, President of the European Parliament, and the Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson, now an arch Eurosceptic, were unlikely bedfellows, but their message to the Prime Minister, Theresa May, seems to be much the same. That is, hurry up and trigger Article 50. That begins the formal process for separating from the European Union. Now, Boris Johnson received a rebuke from Number 10 when he made those comments in New York yesterday, suggesting that we would begin to begin these talks at the beginning of next year. But today, Martin Schulz piled on the pressure, suggesting that Mrs May should hurry up. And intriguingly, he also said that we might learn more at the Conservative Party conference.
We accept that time is needed, but we should not lose too much time to avoid increasing uncertainty.
So your message really to Mrs May is get on with it?
I hope that perhaps already next weekend for the Conservative Party Congress we will hear more.
Well, I think it's unlikely that Mrs May gave any inkling as to what she was going to say to Tory activists to Mr Schulz, but he is a very experienced, a very astute politician, and he knows that she will be under increasing pressure to show her hand at that party conference, which begins next weekend.
Libby, thank you. Still to come this lunchtime, calls for banks to do more to help the victims of bogus bank transfers. And more concerns over plans to reintroduce grammar schools. But first, UK authorities have this lunchtime said that they will be asking tough questions of the technology giant Yahoo after it admitted at least 500 million of its users have had their personal information stolen by hackers over the past 2 years. Details included names, email addresses and phone numbers, but the company say password data and bank information is safe. Our consumer editor Chris Choi joins me live. This also is a moving story. What have you found out this lunchtime?
Well, just happening now, some pretty tough language coming out of the UK authorities from the Information Commissioner. Elizabeth Denham is saying that she's going to be asking some serious questions of Yahoo. She goes further. She's saying people's personal information must be securely protected under lock and key, and that key must be impossible for hackers to find. Let me go through the details of this mega hack that we're talking about today at Yahoo. Information on 500 million Yahoo accounts were stolen in late 2014. BT, incidentally, have confirmed a minority of their customers are involved in all this. Hackers got names, email addresses, telephone numbers, dates of birth, security questions and answers, but Yahoo is saying that the hackers did not get unencrypted passwords.
That sounds reassuring, but what should Yahoo customers do anyway?
Well, yeah, the most important message today is any Yahoo user that has had the same password since 2014, change them and change them quickly. Earlier we spoke to a tech expert, David McClelland.
Yahoo is advising people who've been affected by this attack to change their passwords. And the passwords that people should be using are complex, unguessable passwords, mixtures of letters, numbers, special characters, but most importantly, to use different passwords for different accounts. So if hackers do get access to one of your accounts, they don't get access to all the rest of them as well.
And just one final word on that. It is important also to change your security questions and answers because hackers have got their hands on those as well. So emails that are meant to be all about convenience, I'm afraid will lead to a lot of inconvenience for these Yahoo users.
Yeah. Chris, thank you. Now, similar theme, people who are duped into transferring money to fraudsters online should be protected by their banks. The consumer group Which says high street banks do not financially compensate people who've been scammed. Which says that needs to change, as Victoria Grimes reports.
James Morris was just trying to buy a caravan online. He never thought for a minute he'd fall victim to a scam until he ended up out of pocket. James was hoping he'd be able to get his money back via his bank, but says he was told that wasn't the case.
They said because I'd set up the transaction to transfer the money, that it was basically my fault. You know, they said the money had already been taken, so there's nothing they could have done. I was quite flabbergasted in a way. I mean, I know it was me who set up the transaction, but I just thought in this day and age, the bank should have more checks in place to make sure people don't set up fraudulent accounts, you know. And in a way, I felt foolish. I didn't think I'd fall for it.
Bank transfer fraud is something consumer group Which say they're seeing more and more often. Their research found over 80% had used bank transfers to make payments, while 60% didn't realise they had no consumer protection from their bank if scammed into making a transfer. 9% also had experience with paying fraudsters via transfer or knew someone who had. And now Which wants banks to do more to help their customers when it happens.
We think the banks should shoulder more responsibility to tackle this sort of fraud. There should be more that they do to check and try and stop fraud happening in the first place, but then if consumers are scammed and lose life-changing amounts of money, they should be looking to reimburse those customers like they would do for other payment methods.
You don't seem to have anywhere to go at the moment, and therefore I think something really, really needs to be done.
James says he's hoping that by speaking out, he'll stop others falling victim. Victoria Grimes, ITV News.
And we have tips on our website on how to protect yourself from cybercrime. That's itv.com/news. A police officer in America has been charged with manslaughter after shooting dead a black man next to his car. Terence Crutcher appeared to have his hands raised above his head when he was killed. In Charlotte, in North Carolina, there's been protests this week after another black man was shot dead by an officer. Martha Fairley has the latest.
Filmed by a police dashcam, these are the moments just before Terence Crutcher was fatally shot after his car broke down and blocked a road in Tulsa. Police later confirmed the 40-year-old didn't have a gun on him or in his car. 1 week later, Officer Betty Shelby has been charged with first-degree manslaughter.
Officer Shelby, although now charged, is presumed to be innocent until a judge or a jury determines otherwise.
This guy's still walking.
But the call is growing across America for greater accountability from the police, led by an increasing number of grieving families.
We're demanding full prosecution. We want a conviction, and when that happens, this is a small victory. But we know we got to get ready to fight this war.
Release the video! Release the video!
But in North Carolina, police videos of another fatal shooting of a black man still haven't been released. And protesters took to the streets of Charlotte for a third night, where the National Guard have been called in to provide extra security. On the 2 previous nights, there have been riots here, and despite confirmation a protester shot on Wednesday has now died, the atmosphere last night was calmer. The family of Keith Scott, the man whose shooting by police in Charlotte provoked this demonstration, have said he was carrying a book, not a gun. They have now seen the police video privately, but say it leaves them with more questions than answers and want the public to see for themselves. Martha Fairley, ITV News.
Here, SATs are set for a major review over concerns about tough new exams for primary school children aged between 6 and 11 years of age. MPs will look at the curriculum after some schools threatened to boycott the examinations when new rigorous tests were introduced. Almost half of all pupils in England failed to meet tough new standards in reading, writing and maths, with large discrepancies between different areas of the country. Staying with education, and the first major independent report into the proposed expansion of grammar schools has revealed the plan is likely to have a negative impact on those from disadvantaged backgrounds. The Education Policy Institute's review raises concerns about the government's proposals. It says it'll widen the gap between the rich and the poor. Sejal Carrier has the details.
The Speaker of the House of Commons has to be apolitical.
The grammar school system in Trafford in Greater Manchester has been hailed as a huge success locally. Schools like Altrincham are consistently ranked top of the National League tables. But a major new report suggests creating more grammars like this won't raise overall educational standards and may make things worse. The head here disagrees.
It would be a great idea to increase the percentage of grammar schools because we have huge parental demand. And what I would like to do would be to increase the number of students coming into this school, especially from more deprived areas, so that everybody does have the chance.
Not so according to today's research, which is the largest study of the country's 163 grammar schools. It found there was no evidence more grammar schools would improve overall standards, and it would widen the attainment gap between rich and poor pupils. And more importantly, educational standards in an area with more grammar schools will fall. And that's because children who fail to get in will do worse, and any quota system compelling grammar schools to take in more children of average ability would dilute their benefit.
What quotas are likely to do and what increasing the intake of grammar schools for those pupils are likely to do, they're likely to reduce, firstly, the beneficial impact of grammar schools as they become more comprehensive, and they're also more likely to lead to damaging impacts for poorer children who don't attend the grammar schools.
Remember, they get worse and worse.
The report suggests the money would be better spent on comprehensives like Burnage Academy in Trafford, where this report says the brightest pupils do just as well as they would in grammar schools, but they also cater for disadvantaged students.
For those who don't get into the grammar school, they will feel branded as failures. And if you tell somebody enough that they're a failure, they're not going to disappoint you. They will be.
The Department for Education says relaxing restrictions on selective education can and should be to the betterment, not at the expense of other local schools. And they're still consulting on their proposals. Sejal Karia, ITV News.
And finally, the craze that swept the nation, the push-up challenge, where people are nominated to drop to all fours and film themselves completing 22 push-ups. It's to raise awareness of post-traumatic stress disorder and suicide amongst war veterans. The latest celebrity to accept that brilliant challenge, David Beckham.
It's for a great cause, a serious cause. It's for all the servicemen and women that take their lives every single day.
The former footballer filmed himself on top of a grand piano for the third day of his challenge, and you can see more of Mr. Beckham flexing his muscles on our website, itv.com/news. And there's more about the push-up challenge. That is it this lunchtime. I'm back with Ranveer Singh at 6:30. Till then, a very good afternoon to you. Bye-bye.